Okay, and now we're going live in 5, 4, 3, a bit longer, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think we are live. Let me just refresh the page. There we go. Okay, and we're all set. Hi, everyone. So welcome to the cross-party group for biodiversity. This is going to be focused on sustainable farming in Wales. We do other meetings focused in other areas, but this is particularly pertinent as the agriculture bill is set to be introduced to the Senedd sometime later this year. Thanks everyone for coming. We've got people on YouTube and we should have people watching on Twitter as well. For everyone that's in the Zoom call itself, you've got the agenda and you can see the discussion points. We'll be going forward on a hands up basis. So when we get to discussion, if you please raise your hand, that's for people who haven't been on Zoom very long, or you've got your screen very small, you might have to press more, but go to more, then reactions, and then raise hand. And if you can try and remember to lower your hand when you're done, that'll help us make things smoother. Delistral will be chairing most of the discussion points. So if you need to get her attention, feel free to send her a direct message on the Zoom chat. For everybody watching on YouTube, if you can just chat in the box, and we'll try and depending on how much we get, we'll try to put comments and questions to presenters and Senedd members and anyone else that's speaking. And if you're on Twitter, if you include @WalesLink, the Wales Environment Link account, then I can make sure that I can see you through the various screens that I've got in front of me. So I'm going to hand over to John Griffiths now, our wonderful chair, to introduce the session. John, you are muted.
Diolch yn fawr, Liz. Croeso I bawb. As we have for these meetings, we have a very good attendance today, and it's good to see so many people joining us. Sadly, I think we live in a time of crisis at the moment. We've got the ongoing nature and climate crisis. We've got the situation in Ukraine. We've got the cost of living crisis, and of course, everything is linked and connected in any event. But the way that we use our land here in Wales and of course across the globe is absolutely crucial to every challenge that we face, and that's becoming increasingly obvious from week to week and month to month. Quite a lot of our land in Wales, of course, is rural. And farming is very important in so many ways. And an important part of that equation in terms of land use and how we improve the current situation to meet these challenges. And the idea of public goods or rewarding for environmental outcomes has been developed by Welsh Government now over a period of time. Our land consultation, responding to Brexit, for example, have helped shape and provide a framework to these issues as we move on to more sustainable farming practices than was the case under the Common Agricultural Policy. So the new approach of Welsh Government and so many organisations represented here today is about recognising that as well as products such as food and building materials, we need the natural environment, we need a rich wildlife, we need to provide services like clean water, healthy soils, deal with flooding, carbon sequestration. All of this is part of what our land properly managed and sustainably so can offer. And of course, we found during the pandemic, didn't we, that people reconnected with the environment and with nature quite strongly through the more local life that they had to live, through restrictions and, just appreciation of how important the environment and nature is to everyday life. And that has, I think, introduced a new dimension to the discussions as well. So we need the sort of ecosystems approach that Welsh Government has talked about and developed, working with partners, and that will be good for our rural economy if it's taken forward effectively. And of course, we know that we're part of responding to the global change that we see to global conditions, and a sustainable Wales has to be part of that response. And if we're not part of dealing with these challenges, then obviously they will detrimentally affect Wales as they will the rest of the world. So we know, and the international community knows, that the climate and nature crisis will have absolutely devastating consequences, and that includes our ability to produce food if we don't move away from the way that we've lived up to now. We cannot ignore this challenge, this crisis, because of the scale of it and its importance. None of our ecosystems in Wales are resilient, and we in fact have a duty in the Environment Act to help recover at-risk species in Wales. And again, part of that, doing that, is by properly rewarding, recognising, and indeed fully supporting our farmers. And, you know, in terms of that support, it's not just about funding, of course, it's about ongoing advice and support to help them with their stewardship of the land. And we can all work together, and we do have some really good examples in Wales of this, where there is a really good partnership approach, including farmers, and it is making real progress. We have species champions in the Senedd, which has been, I think, really good in terms of getting cross-party support on these issues. And we know that where there are pockets of land at risk and endangered species are still there, we need to connect up habitats if we really are going to create nature recovery corridors and restore habitats, you know, as their homes. So, you know, a lot to do, but thankfully we know from the membership of this group and the people on the call today that many people are giving their minds and their energies to help address these issues. And I very much look forward to the presentations that we will now receive, and indeed the Q&As later on. So thank you all for being part of this. Diolch yn fawr.
Great, thanks, John. So we'll hand over to Arvon now. Yeah. Okay, yeah, Arvon, that's looking great. Arvon, you are on mute.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, and if you can just maximize your presentation.
If I could figure out how to do that, I would. Right. How do I open this now, Liz?
Of course your office wants to update. If you go to the bottom right, there's that little projector button, or if you just go from current slide in the top left, that should do it actually.
Unfortunately, I can't see any of those things. Do that again. Off tomorrow. Apologies, sorry about this, folks.
No problem at all. At the moment, I can only see the bottom half, which is that rewards environmental outcomes. But I think if you just maximize the presentation.
I think we are there. How's that?
There you go. Yeah, we've got it.
Well, hopefully, folks, that's the most stressful part of my presentation over and done with now, just getting into it. Right, so I'm going to talk for the next 10 minutes about why we need a sustainable farming scheme in Wales that rewards environmental outcomes. And I'm Arvon Williams, I'm Head of Land and Sea Policy for RSPB Cymru, for those who may not know me. So kind of we start with the case for change, I guess. That's me holding the rugby ball. I grew up in a Wales kind of full of nature. Grew up on a farm in mid Wales. I remember hay meadows full of flowers and insects, big thick hedgerows full of life. Curlews and lapwings were still plentiful, including on our farm in mid Wales. And rivers and streams were alive with salmon and suin. The odd one used to end up in the kitchen as well. Different timings back then. But in kind of my lifetime, unfortunately, Wales has become one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. In case anybody's guessing out there, it's about 50 years. And today, that's about 1 in 6 species are threatened with extinction. You know, Once familiar species like watervole, curlew, Atlantic salmon, and high-brown fritillary butterflies are now become very rare. And the reasons for this, well, the main reason for this, unfortunately, is kind of poorly thought out farming policies. We've pushed nature to the brink, and John touched on some of this in his introduction. And over the last 50 years, EU-based payments, mainly from the CAP, have incentivized and prioritized intensification, production, and have failed to adequately protect nature. We can see that the top graphs there give an indication of kind of stock number increases over the last 150 years, and where the EU kicked in, clearly had an impact on sheep numbers in Wales. And then the bottom right there gives an indication of kind of decline in farm and birds. There are correlations here. So why did this happen? Well, the CAP made kind of generous grants available for land improvement, converting semi-natural habitats to agricultural land. There were payments for a while for every animal kept on a farm. Headage payments incentivized kind of an increase in livestock numbers. And even, well, today, I guess, there are still reductions in payments to farmers if there are trees on the farm, if the hedges are too thick, if there's scrub, and if there are ponds. Basically, if anything that kind of isn't kind of productive land, then there's a kind of reduction. Payments are reduced. Clearly a bit of a recipe for disaster when we want to kind of keep nature in the farmed countryside. And even those schemes that were intended to benefit nature, such as Tir Gofal Glastir, haven't been enough to save nature. They just haven't been effective. They've not delivered the right management, and they've not been at kind of the right sort of scale. So why does this loss of nature matter? Why should we care? Well, to start with, nature has an inherent right to exist. And we've done this to nature. So, in my opinion, we're obliged to kind of, sort things out as well. But if the inherent right to existence for nature isn't good enough, and a good enough persuasion, also the perilous state of nature affects us all. And again, John touched on these things. We depend on nature to produce our food and provide us with water and clean air. But apart from woodlands, none of our soils are in good condition. Our air and water quality are suffering from agricultural pollution, particularly kind of impacts of intensive farming. There are other large polluters out there as well, and all pollution needs to be addressed. It's not just farming, but farming does have an impact. And the widespread loss of semi-natural habitats mean we've reduced our countryside's ability to store drinking water and manage flooding naturally. We know that more trees within the landscape would certainly have a benefit there. And also the vast amount of carbon that's been released back into the atmosphere as semi-natural habitats have been converted to agriculturally improved ground is contributing to climate change as well. Nature locks up a lot of carbon. So the result is that none of our ecosystems on which we depend are resilient. I think it's a point that's not always understood. Nature kind of conspires to work together to create ecosystems, and those are the ecosystems that we depend on. And if nature's struggling, then we're struggling too. So what about farming communities and culture? Well, it's kind of clear that policies to date have had a fairly kind of negative impact on the environment and nature. Unintended consequences, I guess, because I don't suppose anybody set out to do this deliberately. But I mean policymakers there, there wasn't kind of the idea of kind of shaping a kind of a policy that would have these detrimental impacts. But ironically, kind of current system hasn't worked that well for farming either. And this is a Welsh Government figure. Today, there are 800 fewer farms in Wales than in 2014. So clearly support isn't working for farming. And the following quote or following is a conclusion from a piece of research undertaken in 2021 by Reading University on stability of farm incomes. And it says, and I'll just read this, direct subsidies paid to farmers based on the area farmed are associated with a relatively large decrease in the stability of farm income across most farm types. In contrast, engagement in environmentally sustainable farming practices, including increasing agricultural diversity, engagement in agri-environment schemes, and reducing the intensity of inputs can increase the stability of many farm businesses, whilst also reducing negative impacts of farming on the environment. To me, that reads like a really good case for a policy based on public money for public goods that kind of drives stability, and that stability in turn drives kind of resilience within the farming sector. I said there's 800 fewer farms today, so let's talk about today a little bit more. What else do we know? Well, we know there's a climate and nature emergency, and we need to look after our environment better, including for future generations, that we need to produce more of what we eat in ways that works with nature. And we also know that we have to do this now because time is running out. Report after report coming out of kind of UK, the UN, further afield, kind of points to, a decade to address climate change, a decade to get to grips with the kind of ecological crisis. We are at, this is the 11th hour now, now is the time to act. But we also know that with the right support, farmers can respond to all of these challenges. In fact, farming is uniquely placed as the only sector that can produce food, restore nature across Wales, and help lock up atmospheric carbon in new, restored and well-managed habitats. There's lots of talk about technology to store carbon. A lot of this technology is somewhere down the pipeline. We know that woodlands could store carbon, that blanket bogs can store carbon, and other habitats can store carbon as well. That stuff we can do now. But this will only happen if we take this unique opportunity to establish a system of support that uses public money as effectively as possible to tackle these huge environmental and social challenges, and to move to a system of food production that is diverse, efficient, and sustainable. We've got one chance to get this right. I truly believe that. I think we've seen this crisis, or these crises developing over decades. We're at the point now where time is short and we need to do something about this now. So is this fantasy farming, or is this the future reality? These kind of farms who can do all of these things. It might sound like a huge challenge, but it's not impossible. There are already farmers, scores of farmers across Wales who have embraced this approach and are producing food, looking after nature, tackling climate change, and providing society with a diversity of environmental benefits. And here are a couple of examples. I was going to quickly whiz through a quick tour of Wales, south to north, showing the types of farms that we're talking about. We've got Caerhys in Pembrokeshire. It's a 65-hectare mixed organic farm, 30 Welsh black cattle, produces lots of other food, including providing vegetables for 45 local families. Hedgerows are a great thing at Caerhys. They're trimmed very kind of sympathetically, and a comment from the farmer there. Hedges are a good natural investment on the farm, and you should protect them. Next, we'll go to Carmarthenshire. I think Howell's on the call today as well. Esgar Lleithdy, 63-hectare upland farm, grazing rights on the hill. Broad range of fantastic wildlife habitats on the farm, which clearly provide lots of other environmental benefits as well. Recent changes, reducing sheep numbers and increasing cattle numbers. So it's not all about kind of reducing, it's about getting the balance. And most notably, reducing the previous heavy use of artificial fertilizers down to none, something very relevant today, given the kind of soaring cost of fertilizer. And Howell says, if you haven't got diversity of wildlife on your farm, you're doing something wrong. He's absolutely right. And then up to North Wales, Flintshire Argoed Farm, 65-hectare organic dairy farm. Incorporates a range of habitats and management that are good for nature, while it's providing wider environmental benefits. I've been working with Bumblebee Conservation Trust in the last couple of years. Has adopted simple grassland management changes, such as cutting alternative headlands when making silage. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but the result is that the semi-improved fields have increased in diversity, and all Bumblebee Conservation's big 7 species are now found on the farm. Good farming has to include not just food production, but habitat protection and restoration. We need nature, absolutely. So these farming systems are our future. And what's required now is an approach that makes this type of farming the norm. And this must be the purpose of the new Sustainable Farming Scheme and the bill, clearly. We believe that future policy must be successful in delivering the following interventions if we are to truly have sustainable farming in Wales. So these are a couple of key areas that future policy must focus on. Must provide support to help farmers move towards sustainable food production that is aligned with the natural productive capacity of land, agroecology, for instance. And the new scheme and the underpinning regulation to ensure the environment and our natural resources are protected, and that there's enough well-managed habitats on farms to restore and maintain nature, and importantly, the ecosystem nature creates and maintains, which we benefit from and which we depend on. New schemes, and Andrew will be talking about kind of new schemes and approaches later. The new schemes must be results-based. Payments must recognise the value of what's been delivered, get away from this kind of negative income forgone and costs incurred. There has to be a value element to payments. And farmers must be provided with adequate advice and guidance throughout the lifetime of the schemes, certainly a failing of kind of current schemes. New schemes should also promote and improve access to all to the Welsh countryside and nature-rich areas. I think we believe a scheme or policies that work like this would represent a just and responsible use of public money at a time when public money is going to become under increasing scrutiny. It's going to be squeezed harder and harder than ever before. Therefore, it must deliver public goods. And just before I finish, I was going to touch quickly on kind of tackling the nature crisis. And to restore nature, we must look after the habitats we have and create new ones to replace those that have been lost. And we're still losing habitats as well. New habitats must be the right type, the right amount, and in the right places to ensure nature benefits. And RSPB, working with other NGOs, is currently developing a kind of range of entry-level type habitat management options that all farmers in Wales could implement, and which, if they chose to do so, would deliver real benefit for nature. You know, we think and we hope this approach could sit very neatly into the kind of an entry level of the new sustainable farm scheme. And as well as restoring nature, well-planned habitats can deliver a wide range of benefits for society. For example, new woodlands can store carbon, reduce flood risk, provide shelter and forage for stock, as well as buffering watercourses. You know, we're now into kind of those nature-based solutions approach. You know, we can use nature in ways that delivers a whole range of benefits for us. And also, in addition to an entry-level type scheme, the new scheme must also benefit and must work for the rare and vulnerable farm and wildlife. Some things can be dealt with through the kind of these entry-level schemes, but some species need a different approach, and they might need farmers to work together to provide a priority species, for example, curlew, with its full ecological requirements at the population or landscape scale. And I've included that picture just to show, you know, those are 3 curlews using kind of a broad landscape in Wales. If the new scheme is going to work for things like curlew and lots of other wildlife, it needs to be able to work at scale as well. And just to finish off, I was just going to say, so, you know, tackling the nature crisis, all those habitats back in place and well managed, kind of new ones and well managed habitats can help tackle the climate emergency and also provide society with wider benefits. So I'm just going to finish there, just with that closing thought that this is, I believe, our one chance to put in place an approach that uses public money to promote diverse, sustainable and efficient land management and food production that's good for nature and people in Wales. I sincerely hope that we do take this one opportunity, and that, I think, is the same tractor. I think I'm probably looking a little bit rougher. Okay, thank you very much. Diolch.
That was great. Thanks, Arbon. I'm just having a little look at the chat, see a couple of questions. I think we'll go straight into WWF. Let me just check on the timings. There we go. Jess, you're ready to go, are you? Yeah, Jess, if you just unmute yourself.
Yeah, if you thought Arvon was bad at technology, just wait. Right.
Yeah, so we'll at 25 we'll have questions for both those presentations. So everyone, feel free to keep using the chat and have them ready. Yes, Jess, if you go ahead and share your screen, I'll give you the thumbs up when it's all showing properly.
For some reason, it's not letting me share. Hang on a sec.
You are definitely a co-host.
Aha, right. No, stop share. Oh, this is where I just...
That's okay.
Problems arise. Okay, keep going. Aha.
Yeah, that looks great.
Yeah, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, I can see your PowerPoint, lovely, filling the screen, starting with the Land of Our Future slide.
Fab. Thank you to Well for organising this, and John for that great introduction, which has actually taken most of my presentation kind of content, which is really good that the message is kind of getting out there as well. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jessica McQuaid, Head of Policy and Advocacy at WWF Cymru. I'm very much part of the team working on agriculture and land use food within the context of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and I work very closely with Alex, Shay and Emily, who are all here today and have contributed to this presentation, so thank you all. So picking up on what John talked about, and also very much thank you to Arvon for doing that great job of explaining the scale of the challenge that we face for nature and climate. I'm going to try and build on that context today about how we use land in Wales, it's key, but then zoom out to the wider food system, looking both at home and abroad, and then finally considering how we can use the agriculture bill and also the food bill, which is probably coming our way, to support and other policy changes that are needed to enable the change to food production in Wales. Firstly, it's worth thinking about challenges we face from a land use perspective. So land across the globe and also in Wales very much needs to reduce emissions, respond to changing climate, and also halt the loss of nature, as well as providing the food needs of ourselves in Wales. This is what we call in WWF the Triple Challenge. And kind of campaign that we're starting at the moment is, if we want to achieve the land of our future, we'll need to address all three in a very integrated way. I think, as well as and Arvon touched on this, as well as protecting, as well as transforming agriculture land use, we also need to be thinking about protecting and restoring our natural habitats across Wales. So even though farmland is critical to nature restoration, we also have to consider how we protect and restore those natural habitats. So as pointed out in this kind of the PowerPoint slide, 80% of land in Wales is farmland. Therefore, farmers have a critical role in addressing this triple challenge. Therefore, the agriculture bill, with its change to farming payments, will therefore be key to future land use in Wales. The discussion that this is stimulating on farming is also a really important opportunity to bring back the public into a space where they feel engaged with food, farming and land use, and recognising the critical value of farmers and the role that they have for the well-being of future generations. As part of this discussion in WWF, we also think it's really important to consider how we bring more people into farming, that they offer a vital opportunity for jobs of the future. So the agriculture bill and new payment scheme is also an opportunity to explore how we can support new entrants and new models of farming. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of now to the wider food system. So food production and agriculture is part of a wider system, and it's really important to address all aspects of the system to enable a transformational change. It can't be done alone by just looking at the agriculture production. So a couple of years ago, we, WWF, commissioned Cardiff University to produce an evidence base on what a sustainable food system would look like in Wales. So it needs to tackle all the issues that we face in this space, social, economic and environmental, and provide a pathway to the changes that we need to get to. And it's what we call the food system for future, a food system fit for future generations. So that report is available online for those who haven't seen it. And I think the slide highlights some of the key findings, not just the environmental issues that the food system is contributing, but that Arvon highlighted, but also those wider social issues, which are just as significant. And when we start to look at the figures around children experiencing food poverty with very limited access to healthy food, in a situation which is only set to get worse with the cost of living crisis, food prices now being described as apocalyptic by the Bank of England yesterday, the Ukraine crisis, and also kind of wheat and other vital crops failing largely to extreme weather events related to climate change, now really is the time to be thinking about how we can create a food system in Wales that supports environmental, social and economic outcomes. When we think about that, we've mapped it very much against the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So there's a slide in the report which outlines how how against each of the goals, the activities or outcomes that we would want to see against those goals. So it's a really useful kind of modelling to have a look at for a food system fit for future generations. Just having some problems with my slides, I'm sorry. Why is that not going forward? So part of that report, one of the key findings that came through was that we need a strategy for a food plan or food system in Wales. But that system very much was an agroecology system. So it's quite, it's a term which probably is new to many of you. I think it's growing in interest globally. In fact, it's the approach to the food system that United Nations has recommended as the key solution to the food crises, food production, agriculture, climate and biodiversity improvements. So agroecology is something that we really trying to promote, build familiarity in Wales. And critical to this, it's a system approach. So it's not just about food production, it's the recognition that we need to integrate that with other aspects of the system. So highlighted on this diagram, food consumption, promoting healthy, sustainable diets, reducing food waste, but also re-establishing the connections between the food the public eats and the people producing it, the farmers on the land. It's also very much about working in a way that is locally and regionally in keeping with the cultural heritage and creating a space for collective future visions, all within the environmental systems capacity, both regional and international. So a core part of that system is the farming method, and regenerative farming is at its heart. So this is again a term that's growing in interest in the UK and globally, which in essence is a farming method which significantly reduces chemical inputs, and also that includes imported feed such as soy, which can cause environmental damage at home and abroad. And I'll say more on that in regards to a slide that's coming up. But regenerative agriculture focuses on improving ecosystems as well, and the resilience of those ecosystems, particularly soil health, which again is something that's a growing interest in the farming sector across the UK. Within this system, there's a clear role for high welfare, low impact livestock, so they very much operate as part of a regenerative farm system. And moving towards regenerative farming practices is kind of, in our view, based on evidence, not just strong for nature and climate rationale, but also has a strong economic argument. It's a good business model. Our recent research from WWF on nitrogen shows that across the UK, the cost of total nitrogen waste from agriculture and food sources is estimated at around 2.3 billion a year, which is equivalent to half of all agriculture profit. So when we start to look at how regenerative farming could be used in the UK and in Wales, we started to ask the question, how would that contribute to our ambition around net zero? The evidence based on that did not exist because UK CCC's analysis is primarily around a land sparing approach. So our UK office, with contribution for us in Wales, produced a Land of Plenty report, which provides the robust evidence-based pathway for agriculture and land use in the UK, which included targets for the agriculture sector. It also came up with a credible pathway for regenerative farming and land use practices, and it offered greater prospects for reducing emissions than previously had been estimated by the Climate Change Committee's research. So it was a really interesting evidence base. And regenerative farming, it does that in a nature positive way. So it's tackling climate change and the nature crisis at the same time. It's worth mentioning within this research, it also included Scope 3 footprint, so looked at the UK food and farming footprint globally, not just of our practice in the UK. And again, that's something that the UK CCC's research didn't include. Just quickly on this slide, the research found that surprisingly to some, maybe not to others, that the changes that are needed across the sector to meet the pathway target. And to note on this is that farm efficiency and management only takes us so far, and not very far, in kind of emission reduction, that we also really need to look at cutting our overseas footprint, particularly in relation to soy feed and fertilizer, but also change production in diet due to diet shifts. So all of this is in the report online. Coming back to that global impact, in Wales, we did a report on Wales Global Responsibility, which hopefully many of you are aware of. And that report looked at our global responsibility, the impact of Wales on our commodity use on land overseas. And one commodity example, soy, Wales imports 190, 101, I can never get my numbers right, I'm dyslexic on this, 1,900, a lot, tons of soy a year. And soy is mostly imported into Wales in the form of meal and beans for livestock feed. And it's 80% of Wales's total soy imports. So our current farming methods in Wales not only have an impact at home, but also on nature and people abroad. And within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, that global responsibility is a critical part of our values of Wales. And we're really pleased that we're working in collaboration with NFU and others to address the issues raised in that report. And this is a picture from our first roundtable on animal feed last year. We're very much working as a collective to identify common solutions to these complex challenges. So keep an eye on the future. We've got more roundtables planned. So bringing this back and the presentation to a close, the agroecology graphic, the Agriculture Bill and Sustainable Farming Scheme sit within these circled areas. The Agriculture Bill is a real opportunity to support transition to agroecology. But we also very much, as just explained, can't be looking at that system, Agri-Bill alone. We also need to be looking much more widely at the food system in Wales, particularly around the relationship to the Food Bill and other enabling policies like the Rural Development Plan. Also critical from our analysis and certainly the farming unions as well is that localising the supply chains in Wales and market creation. And then also the question around diets, access to healthy food and what that looks like in relation to production are going to be wraparound questions that we need to consider. And then finally, I think the questions that we'd also like you to ask of the Agriculture Bill is, does it support the mainstreaming of regenerative farming? Is it enough to halt nature loss and reverse decline to biodiversity? So does it link and support the transition at the scale and pace that's needed to tackle and reduce our emissions? And also, does it promote local participation and inclusivity? Yeah, and that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
That was great. Thanks, Jess. Yeah, some really good stuff there. So it's really difficult to sometimes see how you can reduce carbon emissions in different ways. So I love that pie charts and just tweeted about it. So yeah, I'm gonna hand over to Della Struhl now, our vice chair of the cross-party group, and she can share some back and forth and discussion. I can see there's already been some questions in the chat. So Della, if you can run through those.
Hi, thanks, Liz. I'm very aware that we're running behind and we've only got 4 minutes until the next, and I don't want things to cross over. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read out a couple of the questions, if that's all right. And if I can implore Arfon and Jess to look at the other questions that have come up, and if you could reply to some of the others after we've done this session in the chat, if that's all right. And if anything isn't caught afterwards, maybe we can do that over email and it can be included in the minutes. Fab, that's great. So Nigel, Dan Rose has a very specific question, Arfon, about the 800 fewer farms. Maybe that's something that you could pick up in the chat if that's all right. Nigel Pugh has asked, is there a landscape scale plan to integrate natural flood management in all their forms into the new sustainable farm scheme, that is assisting to retain rainfall where it falls and release it slowly, and increasing feast or famine rainfall conditions to mitigate increasing droughts and floods across Wales?
Does anyone want to pick that one up?
And while you're having a think about that, actually, Nigel has also asked, do we see the onus to diversify and localize as deeply as possible the entire food system, utilizing agroecological practices as an urban and a rural program? And Stephen Jacobs has also asked, can we recognize levels of supply chain investment or a lack of that? So Jess, Jess, I could see that you were nodding there. I'll go to Jess first and then we'll go to Avon.
I think Nigel's given the answer in his question, which is kind of very much, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, very much along the same direction of travel that we were given in the presentation. So I think we're agreeing with each other that agroecology is very much the vision and the pathway that we need to take. And in response to the supply chain question, does it need more investments? Yes, absolutely. And I think there were some recent announcements from the Welsh Government around supply chains and wider wraparounds, which is worth taking note of, and we're currently looking at in WWF coming. I think Shay might be able to give some more detail in the chat on that, Shay, on analysis, if you can.
Great, thank you so much, Jess. Arfon, was there anything that you wanted to pick up on any of those questions?
Just on the supply chains issue, I think absolutely we can't just invest in kind of sustainable farming. There needs to be kind of an investment in sustainable kind of supply chains, that kind of farm to fork approach. So I think public policy has a role in kind of pushing in some ways, and I think supply chains have a role in kind of pulling as well. The two things need to work together. But what's important, whether or not we go down a kind of the more local supply chain route and that sort of diversity, or the kind of, there will still be those kind of big market players, and we will still need to get our food from, from outside of Wales and the UK as well. Those we need to develop those supply chains that have a fairer relationship with farming and food producers. So I think these are huge issues. I think there are some things that we can look at in Wales and have greater control over, like sort of public procurement. I think there's potential to start developing kind of sort of those local supply chains within Wales. But I think there will still be those big players within kind of the supply chains that need to act much more responsibly. I think that's something that probably everybody on this kind of call will have in common as well. That's a big challenge. But I think, yeah, we're not going to be an entirely kind of self-sufficient country, but we need to produce more of what we eat within Wales.
And yeah, Arvin, certainly in the round tables that we've been holding, public sector procurement and the kind of recognises a vital lever to enable the market creation. And I think people are starting to consider particularly the school meals and how that can be produced in a sustainable way and linked to the public procurement. And also there's some deep dive work that's been done in Carmarthenshire looking at the relationship between public procurement and supply chains and enabling kind of localised food access. So that's worth a look at anyone who's interested. But also we need to create the demand a lot more for that type of food. And that's a whole nother question and discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much. Liz, are we best moving on now, do you think, because of the time, or and to leave it to the chat? I'm happy to read out others, but I'm in your hands here.
Well, let's I'm not sure when the minister's going to get here, so let's go back to presentation so that we can make sure that we're all back to time for when she gets here, I think. Although we'll just because we were talking about the food and farm to fork strategy, Shay's put in the chat, just to wrap that discussion up, that there's certainly there hasn't been enough discussion on urban farm production systems and the way we get urban areas involved in food production, and flagged that there's a community food strategy that Senate's been talking about a lot, potentially producing. So that may be something that can go in a future community food strategy, and obviously would expect a community food strategy to be really well aligned with the things that are going forward in a co-design scheme and how those things match up. So one to watch for Senate watchers like me. So yeah, Andrew, are you ready to share your screen?
Yep, sure, I'll give it a go. Is that coming through?
It's just as started. Oh, and there we go. Yeah, so we can see that. So if you just maximize the PowerPoint. It's not quite filling the screen yet.
Not quite. Here it comes. Is it there?
Yep, there we go. Yeah, that's
Great.
all.
Okay.
Go for it.
Right, thank you very much. So my name is Andrew Tubnam. I'm Land Use and Farming Advisor with National Trust Cymru. Over the next sort of 12 slides or so, I'll take you through what we're doing with this payment for outcomes project on Llyn. Hopefully it gives you a sense of where we are with working with our tenants and how to achieve a sort of shared vision that's holistic, looking at the food production as well as the nature and how to get the best combination of the both. What I'm really going to be talking about in detail, well, not in detail, is just the payment mechanism, which is what the Payment for Outcomes project is actually evaluating. But what it's enabled us to do is to build a much closer relationship with our tenant farmers. So in a nutshell, the Payment for Outcomes trial involves payments for habitat-based environmental objectives that are based on measurable outcomes on the farm or results on the farm, rather than solely on the delivery of specific actions. So the farmers are free to take what actions they feel they need to do to achieve those outcomes. They can learn from the experience, and they've got control over the condition of their land alongside the guidance and support of a range of advisors, which in our case includes independent farm business advice. Let's just try and sort of put the two sides together. So that's really what this will hopefully take you through. So who are we? National Trust Cymru, a conservation charity with about 46,000 hectares of land in Wales. Most of it is subject to farming activities or managed as farmland. And about 12% of that is managed directly by the National Trust through rangers and volunteers. But what that means is the majority of our land, we depend on the activities of farmers and other managers to achieve our charitable purpose and benefits for nature, people and climate. So that's something like 240 agricultural tenancies, and about half of the land area is common land as well. So that's why we're particularly interested in how we can work with our tenants. The project itself is sitting within a long-standing partnership, the Llyn Landscape Partnership, which is led by Gwynedd Council, made up of various organisations, including farming unions. The actual project is funded by National Trust, but it sits within a sustainable management scheme, Welsh Government funded project, which is led by Gwynedd Council, the Tiramore SMS. By the way, I think these presentations are available. So yeah, there is quite a lot of text to take in, but they will be available to you. So that's really what we're trying to understand. You know, can our farmers deliver a greater quantity and quality of public goods and go beyond what's conventional agricultural agri-environment schemes have been providing? They can make their own decisions. Can they actually be incentivized to go further, really making progress up to scale, and in so doing build up a better knowledge of nature-friendly farming, which should work both ways as well, I should add. It's not just about organisations like ourselves talking to the farmers, it's about the farmers telling us about how the land is working. So these are the three farms in our trial. They're all sheep and beef, but they represent, as is human nature, quite a spectrum of businesses and approaches, from a fairly small farm at Miliau to reasonably average sizes elsewhere. The project could be seen as a sort of counterpart to another payment by results trial that the National Trust has been leading in England as part of DEFRA's tests and trials programme. So we're not trying anything particularly new here. It's being implemented in other places in the UK, and lots of work is going on in Ireland on results-based schemes as well. But what we're doing is something which covers the whole farm, and I think that is different as well. So each of these farms, we've worked with our tenants to draw up a capital works and a habitat options plan. The capital works are being funded by the SMS scheme, and we're paying for the habitat options or the betterment through this trial. This is what it's covering. It's covering a suite of habitats that are typically found on the farm. And by habitat, I also include improved grassland and semi-improved grassland, and the arable as well. There's important arable plants in these areas. So the photos just show some of the gains that are just starting to appear, with previously neglected coastal grasslands, which are gradually losing some of their floristic diversity. Grazing being reintroduced in a controlled manner, so that they're now opening up. They're better for coastal species, including chough, which can actually feed into those lawns. The scoring system, how do we measure those outcomes or the results? It's meant to be as simple as possible, because really we want the farmers to be helping with the scoring, so they can get their eye into what to be managing for. So, for example, on a semi-improved grassland, on all the habitats, we have positive and negative indicators. We want to keep this as simple as possible, and also so that we can measure it efficiently. So positive indicators might be how much of that sward is able to flower and set seed during that time, and what are the key indicators that we think are actually showing that there's quality habitat there. And then the negative indicators might be some of the pernicious weeds, or the signs of enrichment which might be coming in, or overgrazing or undergrazing, that sort of thing. There's various other attributes which are looked at and scored. All of this combines to come up with a total point score for that particular habitat on that particular field, and then that translates into a condition score. So the score on this graph is 1 to 10. You can achieve a score of 2 by a combination of different attributes, positive or negative. The red line, though, is the payment rate. So that's not linear. That's deliberately unlinear, so that it provides a sort of incentive to make progress up the scale. And then it reflects that actually the top rate is actually quite difficult to get further, but there's still an improvement. We're not investigating what sort of payment rate incentivizes change. We've just picked, we've mapped things across to Glass-tier rates and then added a bit more to reflect the sort of incentive to participate in the trial, if you like. But actually how much should be rewarded is something for policymakers to decide. We're just looking at, can you get improvements by providing this sliding scale according to how the results are going. So some of the results so far are suggesting that the results are going in the right direction, although we should be recognizing that nature takes time to respond over time. Since the project has been running properly in 2019, there has been some improvements with the coastal slopes in particular, possibly some trending upwards, which is showing positive signs with our hay meadows. Semi-improved is more of a mixed bag, it has to be said. And what we need to be able to see is data across several years to be able to account for things like weather having an impact, and also to be able to see that the farmers are starting to take the management on. So in terms of what that looks like, the vision, this is from one of the farms, Kurt Farm, and the photos just show that there's been a fair amount of habitat creation undertaken where we're working with our tenant there. We're providing some of the seed, and we're helping establish the conditions and put that in place. But in terms of those maps, the one on the left is the before, the one on the right is the after, a few years into the project. And if you can see only one thing on that map, it's that it's a bit more colourful, which represents a lot more diversity of habitats. And in essence, we're getting the coastal belt to expand and provide companion habitats alongside it, whether it's hay meadows or more sort of coastal grassland. Now, I mentioned independent farm business advice, and this is a great graph for a Tuesday lunchtime, but this is an example of some of the work that we did, which actually helped to really unlock the thinking with Kurt Farm, just looking at where their money was going in the farm system. Their output, measured in terms of sales, is represented on this graph as 100% at the start of the project, but they weren't making money from that. They were making money from other sources. They were actually losing money because their costs, these so-called corrective variable costs, which are required to sustain that number and type of animals on the farm, possibly beyond what the farm could naturally sustain, were eating into all the profits and taking it out completely. So they're moving back towards this blue line here, which is about a sort of 30% reduction in sales, but they're back into profit in that area. And they've achieved that by changing the breed of cattle so that it's stabilizer cattle, which are much better adjusted to the natural forage, getting more from natural production. They've reduced their sheep a bit as well, so they've got basically more freely available grass on farm, and they're trying to get more from it by having the right sort of animals. And they're getting back into this space, which is profitable. Now, that has been the key to helping all of the other nature games start to work. We really are trying to get nature at the heart of the business model. So it's not just providing a payment, but it's making sense for the farmer because it actually drives their production properly. And it's done in a way which allows nature to thrive. So these are some of the responses from our tenants, and it definitely has improved the relationship between essentially landlord and tenant, but it's become more of a partnership. We are working with our tenants now, and they're really appreciating having the attention of a farm advisor. We're looking at how they're doing across the whole farm, and I should say that working across the whole farm is really important in terms of making all the nature areas join up. But receiving feedback on that front has been what's really been valuable to them, and they are responding. So it's interesting just to see the psychology of this, and it may not just be money which is in incentivizing the improvements. It's just the direct personal touch of knowing that you're doing a good job, basically. So these are our headline sort of findings so far. We are providing quite a lot more support, but it's a less prescriptive scheme. What we're trying to do is get farmers more involved in the monitoring. They're saying that they're feeling more confident about that, but they still need more time to get to grips with some of the indicator species. They had a low confidence in that at the start. It's only a little bit further forward now. But anyway, I won't read through all of those because I'm conscious of time, but these slides are available afterwards. So that is the end of this, and I hope that's been useful. And in summary, we're trying to really just put the whole, as I say, the two parts, the food production and the nature benefits together into one approach, which actually gets a lot more as a result.
Thank you so much. Oh, if it's all right, we'll go straight into. Oh, I'm hearing an echo. I'll try again. Okay, no, that's great. Should I go straight into Q&A? I think we've got 5 minutes, but if the minister is arriving late, then let us know and we can carry on.
I'm here, Dennis.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yes, okay. Are you all right if we just have 5 minutes quickly for questions? Nice to see you. I think Hugh Aranka Davis has his hand up. We'll go to Hugh.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you very much. Really interested in terms of the economics, but also what the farmers' experience of this was and some of the subtle nuances of the approach to this and previous agro-environment schemes as well. I'm just wondering, what do you think? I noticed how much of this relied on really expert advisors that could balance the advice on the economics of a farm with the biodiversity gains that we could see and going on that journey with the farmer. Have we got real barriers in having what I would regard as, in essence, a small army of people who could do that if we were to do this on a bigger scale? Realistically, can we achieve this, even if there was a will to do it?
I suppose there's 2 ways I'd approach the answer. The first is that we didn't have one advisor doing both. We separated out the economics advice, really because we wanted to keep that independent. This is a landlord-tenant relationship at the heart of it, so we needed that to be independent, and we didn't see the fine detail of the results. The other aspect is that we're looking at it as an investment rather than an ongoing cost. It's about getting the farmers to a position where they can drive the change and they can be leading it. So it does feel, compared to how accustomed we are to current agri-environment models, to be more input heavy, but that should just be a front loading really, rather than an ongoing. Is that okay?
Yeah. Who is putting his thumb up? Does anyone else have a question for Andrew before we go to the Minister? I don't see anyone else's hand up. There were people in the chat. Oh, and
there's one more from Stephen Jacobs, so we'll go to for a second, and to Larry, it'd be really good to hear from, and then yeah, after you two, if we go to the Minister. But I also wanted to highlight, I'm not sure Andrew mentioned, that if any Senedd members are interested in visiting the Llŷn Peninsula and visiting the project and actually seeing it with your own eyes in the real world rather than online, then they're very happy to host that. You can email me or Andrew, and we'll put you on a list, because I think the species champions know well that nothing quite like seeing it, face to face and seeing exactly how nature's benefited. But yeah, if I just hand over to Stephen for a quick comment.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thanks, Andrew. That's brilliant. I haven't seen the presentation before, I must confess, but it's marvellous every time I see it. Was it a success? Would you do it again? And would you spread it across Wales?
Yes, it is a success. It's building the relationship with our tenants. It's getting more results. It's a long journey, so it does need repeating, and it needs extending. So I think there is applicability elsewhere, but crucially, it's ensuring that nature-friendly farming business model side of it is part of it. It's not just an ecological scoring system; it's a whole farm approach. So yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And then final question to Larry.
Yeah, my question was actually looking back as well to something both you, Andrew, said and Arvon, which was about the quality of that advice and how important it is. And I know that, as someone else said earlier as well, that obviously we haven't got unlimited supply of public money, and that now it needs to deliver on lots and lots of different things, as does land does. So where do you think the balance is there? Because obviously we don't have, like you were saying here, we don't have this army of advisors. Broad brush advice isn't going to go far enough, and it is a very expensive way of facilitating these schemes. If we're going to actually achieve all these different outcomes, we need all land involved in the scheme. We need all farmers. Whereas these sort of schemes, Glassted was about 10 times more expensive to administer than the BPS. So how are we going to get that critical mass of people and farmers and farmland engaged in the scheme without spending an awful lot of money on sort of broad brush advisors, when actually the economics and the biology is very complex?
Hi, Larry. That's a great question. So, I mean, it's going to have to be an all-fronts approach, isn't it, with training as well as advisory support. I don't think you can really cut the corners and provide just remote advice. There has to be some level of direct support available, if not provided. So, and again, I come back to that point that it's an investment to this. Yeah, the sort of system that we're talking about here is maybe not something which is being really understood or grappled with, or properly evaluated as a mainstream way of farming. So this has to be a sort of shift, a big shift, really.
Can I just come in there and perhaps add a couple of things to that as well? It's a really important question to Larry, and I think it's probably one of the key things that that we need to get right. I think we probably need an advisory audit in Wales first to know who's out there and what we've got, and then in preparation for the launch of the new scheme. I think we do have a couple of years now to start thinking about that really key bit of providing the advice and guidance, and how to integrate the advice and guidance. I think what will be really helpful as well is having kind of lots of demonstrations of what good looks like. So we've got kind of really good sort of case study farms, and the bit we can kind of get that sort of peer-to-peer learning. But I think we need a lot more of these kind of examples across across Wales. I also think there's a, you know, as Andrew said, there's a long-term kind of, you know, we've got to look to the future here. So, you know, I think advice and guidance should extend back into, you know, agricultural universities and colleges, and we need to start kind of getting this into the kind of the ground roots of farming. So, yeah, Josh, thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you all so much for that discussion. Over to you, Liz, and to the Minister as well. Over to you.
So, Leslie, over to you. I don't know if you have a presentation or anything to share, do you?
No, I don't have a presentation. Obviously, time's really of an essence because we've got plenary, so I'll have to go about 20 past. But I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you to come along and give an update on the proposals that we have for our sustainable farming scheme. So I'm sure you're all well aware of the history. Obviously, leaving the European Union did give us an opportunity. I think there are very few opportunities, but this was one to really ensure that our farming support helps us address both the climate emergency and also the nature biodiversity emergency. So I just thought it'd be really useful, Chair, to give an update of where we currently are ahead of the launch of the Sustainable Farming Scheme draft proposals in the summer. I say the summer, in a couple of months. So you'll be aware that we've had several consultations around the way we support the sector. And we also brought forward the Agricultural Wales White Paper, and that really sets sustainable land management as the framework for our future agricultural support. So what we're doing is developing proposals, and I should say I'm joined by my official James Owen today, who's been leading on this. And we're proposing a sustainable farming scheme which will support farmers to deliver a range of sustainable land management outcomes. The Land Management Reform Stakeholder Group have really helped us shape those proposals, and that group includes several of you on the call, I'm sure, you know, RSPB, Wildlife Trust, Woodland Trust, many organisations, farming unions and the forestry sector. You'll be aware in our programme for government, tackling the climate and nature emergencies are absolutely a priority for us in government. So what the proposed SFS does is it will focus on really restoring ecosystem resilience, and that includes improving the condition and connectivity of semi-natural areas. Improving resilience through creating resilient ecological networks obviously will benefit a range of species.
Can someone unmute?
No, it's okay, I can unmute myself. I've got gremlins. I keep attaching my Wi-Fi to the hotel across the way for some unknown reason, so apologies for that. So I was talking about how we're going to improve resilience through creating resilient ecological networks, and also we want to see improved soil management with all the which will also obviously provide benefits for biodiversity. As we know, our agricultural sector is absolutely at the heart of our rural communities. We've got very high standards in our food, farming and land management, and they're key to the climate and biodiversity emergencies, and farmers absolutely see themselves as part of the solution. The Sustainable Farming Scheme will be different to the basic payment scheme. The fundamental change will be that the level of payment will be linked to the actions which an active farmer undertakes. It will include actions to manage and create natural habitats and increase levels of on-farm biodiversity. And the actions in the scheme will be structured into 3 layers, so universal, optional and collaborative, and will reward both creation and maintenance. The scheme will also support collaboration. It will work alongside and complement the universal and optional actions to deliver improvements at scale based on local or national priorities, and that will include collaborating to create interconnected habitats across landscapes to aid species recovery. We know if we are going to tackle climate emergency, we need to plant 43,000 hectares of new woodland by 2030 and 180,000 hectares by 2050 if we're going to meet the balanced pathway that the Climate Change Commission has set out. So that's equivalent to planting around 86 million trees by 2030, and some elements will be carried forward in the SFS. We will be publishing a scheme outline in the summer, as I said. It won't be the final scheme. I just want to assure people about that. It will include detail on the structure and the specific actions which we're proposing farmers will undertake. The actions in the scheme, as I said, will be structured into 3 layers. We have been working very closely with farmers to co-produce the document. James, who, as I said, is on the call with me, has been meeting with farmers. Obviously the COVID pandemic did delay that engagement a bit more, but he's really managed to work with many farmers, and we'll be having a further sort of tranche of work around the co-design after we do the scheme outline launch in the summer. We propose providing support to farmers through the Sustainable Farming Scheme, which will be targeted at the sustainable land management, which will be setting out in the agricultural bill, which I'll also be introducing later this year. The focus really is to engage with as many farmers as possible about the practicalities, because if this scheme doesn't work for them, then it won't work for anybody, will it? So it's really important it works for them. It's so really important we hear their views. No final scheme decisions will be made until we've consulted on our detailed proposals next year, 2023. So it's very technical. There's lots of technical details, and that timescale will really enable farmers to engage with us around those proposals, as I say, to make sure it's deliverable and it's practical, because that's really important. And obviously this period of co-design that we're going to have in the summer will then further inform the development of the scheme, and of course the approach that we have to the transition. I think it's really important to remember that future support for farming must reflect our need for sustainable food production, and that support must also maintain and enhance the environmental benefits of farming so that we can tackle the challenges presented by both the climate and nature emergencies. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Gwyn. Delith, it's probably better if I take over this point, isn't it? Yes, okay. As Leslie mentioned, the Minister mentioned, we have to be back in the Senedd. Those of us who are members of the Senedd, we have to be in plenary before very long. So perhaps I could start by asking members of the Senedd who are in the meeting whether they would like to make any points or indeed ask any questions at this stage.
I think we've got Thea Griffith and Peter Fox on the call if either wanted to give their thoughts.
Yes, please.
Otherwise, I know that Jane Davison had a question she wanted to ask as well, but I'm not sure she's currently here right now.
Well, Thea's posted a few points in the chat, hasn't he? So, Thea, are you still with us?
Just about, John. Yes, just about. Yes, I am.
Okay, Thea, what would you like to ask the Minister, or what point would you like to make?
Yeah, I mean, it was just in passing, picking up on some of the previous comments, really, about the suggestion of an audit of, advisory audit to see what resource we have out there. I was just wondering whether the Minister could tell us, to what extent the government has actually looked at what there is out there, because obviously, if we are, a new regime is going to be introduced, so clearly there's going to be a big emphasis on working closely with farmers, and particularly on this agenda, where you need a deeper understanding than just ticking boxes. Do we have the capacity? And I mean, my guess is we don't. So what's the plan to address the capacity issue in parallel with introducing the new regime, really? And the only other point I made was I've said for a long time, I think our council farms could work much harder in terms of delivering some of this agenda and being exemplars. Maybe those tendencies would be dependent on, introducing more innovative approaches and trialling and piloting things, maybe linking up with agricultural colleges so that the brightest and the best students can actually have a chance to, to trial and put their new ideas into practice in real time.
Okay, clear. Diolch yn fawr. Minister, would you like to come back on those points at this stage, please?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ian. It's good to see you back. I hope you're feeling better. I think, capacity is obviously an issue. We are working very hard to make sure that we're going to use RPW, for instance. And, I think there was a lot of concern initially here that, we wouldn't have the number of people to go out on each farm, because obviously, each individual farm. Well, we're certainly working to make sure that we do have that capacity. And as I said, James is working very hard with the agricultural sector. It's not gone as fast as we would have wanted because of COVID. I think that's fair to say, but also all the challenges that have been thrown down. It just seems to be one thing after the other. And, now we've got the Ukrainian war, which is obviously having an impact, and particularly on the agricultural bill, because we're having to look at the impact of the trade deals, particularly, and also food security. And, we've always been very clear that sustainable food production has to be part of the sustainable farming scheme. Also, Farming Connect, you may be aware that we've just extended the contract for Farming Connect. I personally think they have a huge role to play in helping us with capacity and helping us with engagement. I don't know if James wants to say anything more around the audit. Sorry, James.
James?
So we haven't undertaken an audit as such. I think what we have done is listen to the feedback from the free consultations we've held around the need to give farmers the tools they need to undertake good assessments on the farm, supplemented really with good guidance, support, and availability of advisors. So I think in our proposals, what we've tried to do is reflect some of the concern that we've had in the consultation around this fear of an army of consultants going around Welsh farms, but work themselves, knowing that understanding that they know their farms probably better than anyone else.
As you can probably tell, James is currently on a farm doing just that.
Yeah, well, I think we got that anyway. Thanks, Leslie. Peter Fox, is Peter still with us? And if so, would you like to make any points, Peter?
I agree with Howell's comments as well about there are some really there is some fantastic stuff going on, and say the farmers absolutely see themselves as part of that solution, and they're really helping us with that.
I can't see Peter on the call anymore. Sorry, go on, John.
No, okay. I think Jane Davidson, you mentioned, Liz, would like to come in. Jane?
Yeah, Jane, are you able to? There we go.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, hello. Sorry, I was trying to do a real behind the scenes thing. So hello, hello, Leslie. How lovely to meet you. Sorry, partly I'm on the call because I'm a smallholder. I've got 13 acres. We grow organically, etc. Very, very interested in all the positive stuff that's going on. But there's this massive narrative out there in Mid and West Wales at the moment, and I keep having to do a sort of defence of the Senedd in the context of who is buying up Wales. What they're buying it up for. And I just wondered, Leslie, whether you could say something about that, because I'm hearing people are buying it up for timber, but they're doing it for single stand timber, so it's not looking at broadleaf indigenous woodland, etc. So I'm just wondering what action the government and the Senedd can take in terms of ensuring that even if people buy up land, they can only deliver on the land ambitions of the Welsh government and the Senedd.
Thanks, Jane. Good to see you. So I think it's fair to say probably for about a year now, we've heard about, mass areas of land being bought up, mainly. So I haven't heard really about timber, but mainly for carbon offsetting. So, I was told Manchester United had bought a very large farm in Mid Wales, and a lot of it was anecdotal. And, we are trying to find out, exactly what is going on. And that's a piece of work that obviously Julie James, where forestry and trees and woodland sits in her portfolio now. So it's a piece of work we're doing jointly to try and ascertain just how much. Certainly my discussions with the farming unions, they have given me information about people, being cold called to sell their farm. Now, as a government, we can't tell people who they can sell their land to. However, does it concern us? Yes, it does, because if we don't want to lose prime farmland, forever to, a large global organization, I won't name names, that just wants to do carbon offsetting. So it's a big piece of work that we're undertaking at the moment, Jane, to try and find out how much is sort of anecdotal or hearsay, to actually get some facts about it. And again, for everyone on the call, I'd urge you, if you do have any information, please just drop me or Julie James an email, because it is something that we want to know about. I have to say, the whole point of the sustainable farming scheme is to keep farmers farming, keep farmers on the land. I've always been very conscious of the need to do that, to protect the Welsh language, as well as other aspects of our communal, of our rural communities. So, we believe our land sharing approach, that sustainable food production, alongside those environmental outcomes, will really deliver that.
I think it's a really valid point about keeping people farming as well, is that we want to make sure that new generations can come into farming as well and make sure that land's still available. And there's Arvon at RSPB brought up earlier that there's been many, like over 400 farms lost through unsustainable basic payments, and a lot of them become part of larger farms and part of other things. But we want to get people back into rural Wales, don't we, and back at newer generation farming in this sustainable way.
So that's an area that I've always been really keen on, you know, sort of bringing forward the next generation. Interestingly, I was at a presentation yesterday of the Scottish Government's agricultural scheme coming up, and they're having a focus on it as well. So I've asked officials to meet just to see if there's anything we can learn, you know, from Scotland. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go.
That's okay. I heard the plenary bell. So
thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Liz, I similarly a better report for duty. So may I leave it to you at this stage, and we'll catch up later.
I'll take over chairing. Senate members go to First Minister's questions. I think you're the last one on the call, John. So thank you so much for chairing. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
In the autumn, I expect, but everyone else can stay on the call for now.
Okay, diolch.
So I'm just going to have a quick look at Twitter and YouTube. YouTube chat hasn't been very busy, but hopefully that because everyone is very focused on the presentations and absorbing all the discussion. There's been a lot on the Zoom chat. I mean, there's no easy answers, is there, for reforming farming wholesale, but I think it's really encouraging the progress that's been made. Yes, what have we got? There's a lot on, the way that advisory capacity is set up. And I saw a comment earlier, which, here we go, from Hal from the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Farmers learn more from farmers than expensive consultants and advisors. It's about time we have pilot farms up and running. I think that's a really good point, is that it's always easier to see something actually working on the ground. It takes years and years for these things to happen. And the more that we can do share best practice and collaboration across farmers, and not just from a consultant that comes in every 5 years, we want people to be sharing practice and to be learning from each other, because sometimes you only know by trying. Do any of the speakers, Arvon, Andrew or Jess, want to come in and respond to anything that the Minister just said?
I was going to respond to Jane's question. Just something else to flag when we've looked into this is the commercial planting on land for carbon offsetting also has the danger of the emissions then not getting accounted for in Wales. So essentially then it's not just the challenges to the communities that might be opposed to it for various reasons and the issues that we've just discussed, but it can have an impact on our emissions accounting and how agricultural land use can contribute to that. So that's something that kind of is often missed from the debate, that it's worth bearing in mind as well.
Cool. Well, I think that wraps up the session. Any final comments from anyone? Arvon, did you want to say anything, or Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to. Sorry, Andrew. I think I just pipped you to the post. I think I think it's great. Hopefully, a good event. Hopefully, people really got taken something from this. I think I think there's a general thing. I get the feeling that kind of, all kind of sides are being dropped here, that kind of environment and agriculture kind of are starting to work more closely on these sort of areas, which I think is hugely encouraging. I guess it might still be a bit of a bumpy road going forward, but I think we're all kind of starting to kind of coalesce around, kind of a bit of a vision for Wales. And I, for one, very much look forward to kind of continue to work with NGOs, but also kind of the farming unions, and importantly, sticking with the kind of the knottier problems and finding ways to work our way through those kind of more challenging problems. And there are lots of issues there that are kind of common. Some of the threats and some of the risks, some of the opportunities, some of the barriers are common to all of us. And I think continue to kind of work on those, I think, is really important. So very much kind of very pleased to see kind of a good showing from the unions here today. So diolch yn fawr, thank you.
And Andrew, final call to you.
Yeah, well, just to echo that, really, I think some of the chat we just had about advisory support's been brilliant. So I think that is the where the action is, and just as a sort of take home from what we heard from the Minister, there's it's sort of hitting all the right notes, I think, in terms of the land sharing approach and the focus on farm economics, and the mention today, which I've not heard before, about ecosystem resilience, tying that to the scheme. I think that's really to be welcomed.
Yeah, ultimately we know that unless our ecosystems are resilient, we'll never be able to produce food sustainably, and we won't be able to remotely reverse the nature crisis or reduce our carbon emissions. Cool. Well, I'm gonna leave it there because we're edging up to 1:30 now. I believe there is climate change questions tomorrow in the Senate, so we'll see if anyone brings it up. But I just want to say a big, huge thank you to everyone. This is the Senate members group, and this would be John's job usually, but as secretary, I'll sub for him. Yeah, thank you so much for everyone for contributing. It's massively appreciated, and we'll continue these discussions through Wales Environment Link and through Land Use Working Group, and we'll continue working with the Senate members and stakeholders. So yeah, if anyone wants to come to any future meetings, you've got my email, drop me a line. And thanks very much for everyone that's been watching on YouTube and been looking at the live tweeting on Twitter.